Hey everyone and welcome back. Today I wanted to build a dark fantasy graveyard watched over by this absolutely massive creature from Rescale Miniature, called the Carrion King. The idea for this diorama is that this ancient guardian of death has answered after humans started disturbing the natural cycle of life and death. Which honestly sounds like a terrible idea from the start. And because one giant necrotic bird apparently wasn't enough for me, the dead have also started rising with it. So to begin the build, I started cutting up some XPS foam to create a rough shape of the landscape. I wanted the graveyard to sit higher up and slightly spill over the edges of the base to make the whole scene feel more unstable. To build up the height of the hills a bit faster, I also layered in torn up sheets of cork. The rough edges made it much more easier to create natural variation in the terrain without having to carve all those uneven shapes directly into the foam by hand. I also added some few leftover chunks of foam underneath the center slope to help support the large dirt avalanche later on. With the rough shape of the terrain finished, it was time to start working on the buildings scattered throughout the graveyard. For the smaller mausoleum, I used some foamboard and cut the walls from a single piece so I could fold the structure together more easily. I drew on the shape of the doorway before cutting out the windows and gluing the building together. For the much larger ruin atop of the hill, I used the same technique again, but adjusted the cuts to create the octagonal shape of the structure before adding the tall Gothic windows. I wanted this building to feel heavy and ruined and partially collapsed, so I may have taken a hammer to one of the resin windows to help sell the damage a little better. Once both buildings were finished, I glued them into the diorama and started covering the walls with small XPS foam bricks in different shapes and sizes. For the mausoleum roof, I cut up small strips of cardboard to create the roof tiles and glued them onto the roof. And finally, to make the large structure feel more abandoned and weathered, I damaged parts of the bricks and textured the foam using a rock and some aluminium foil. With the ruins finished, I started covering the entire diorama in sculptamold to blend everything together, and to build up the large collapsing dirt slope running throughout the graveyard. I also added larger clumps around parts of the terrain where rocks would eventually sit later on. While the sculptamold was still a bit wet, I started placing tombstones all throughout the diorama, carving some of them directly into the terrain and slopes to give the graveyard a more strange and unnatural feeling. A lot of inspiration for this build came from the atmosphere and world design found throughout the From Software games. To create the corrupt soil of the graveyard, I began preparing a mixture using plaster, small rocks, rough sand and fine sifted sand. Then came the black paint, slowly darkening the entire mixture before adding water and PVA glue to bind everything together. The results were a thick necrotic sludge, it honestly looked capable of awakening the dead on its own. Once the mixture was ready, I spread the corrupted sludge across the entire diorama to create a dead soil surrounding the ruins and graveyard. While the base was still wet, I continued adding more tombstones throughout the landscape, along with dead branches and bones scattered across the terrain. I also added the first of the awakened dead, slowly emerging from their eternal slumber beneath the graveyard. To help strengthen and protect the foam building before painting, I cover them in a mix of black paint and Mod Podge. And finally, it was time to place the Carrion King himself into the diorama, before priming the entire piece black and finishing it with the center highlight using white spray paint. And now, for the story behind this diorama. For centuries humanity feared death above all else. Kings searched for forgotten knowledges. Scholars buried themselves within ancient ruins. And deep beneath the world, long abandoned forms of magic were uncovered once more. At first, the miracles seemed harmless. Lives grew longer, disease became weaker, and death itself slowly loosens its grip upon mankind. But the natural order had already begun to fracture. The old graves no longer rested in silence. Whispers spread through the ruined kingdoms of bodies moving beneath the soil, of empty catacombs found torn open from within, and in places where death had been denied for too long, ancient beings began to awaken. The Carrion King was one of the first to return, an ancient god, worshipped long before recorded history, a guardian bound to the cycle of death itself. And wherever his shadow falls, the dead rise with him. Now the graveyards no longer sleep, and this may only be the beginning. Across the world, more ancient gods now began to stir from their slumber. Some beneath ruined kingdoms buried by time, others deep within forests, where the earth itself had long since become corrupted. And as mankind continues searching for ways to escape death, they unknowingly awakened forces far older than themselves. The Carrion King does not seek worship nor conquest. He arrives only as a reminder that death was never meant to be conquered.